driver behavior studies, you know.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, and welcome to the automated vehicle event here in Fairfax County. My name is John Faust. I represent the Drainesville District on the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, and I'm also chair of the Fairfax County Economic Advisory Commission. And I want to thank some of the staff from Fairfax County who support the Economic Advisory Commission, and who are, especially those who are particularly involved in setting up today's event. We look to Rob Stolzer for our leadership. He does a great job, Deputy County Executive. And working for Rob and the two people who really had an awful lot to do with this event today are Etta Davis and Dale Castello. So thank you very much. Really didn't know what to expect whenever we got invited to this, but I certainly haven't been disappointed, and I hope you haven't either. And we have a great program to cover today. Before we get started, and I will be introducing a little more formally our chairman, Sharon Bulova, but I would like to acknowledge that she's with us this afternoon. And from the Springfield District, representing the Springfield District, we have Supervisor Pat Harity. Supervisor Harity is also Vice Chairman of the Economic Advisory Commission. And a Hokie. That means more to some people than others. And I also want to acknowledge Kathy Smith, Supervisor from the Sully District. Thank you for joining us. I don't think I saw any other supervisors with us. Kathy Hudgens. Thank you for being here. Okay. Well, unlike California and many other states, Virginia hasn't put in place any regulatory roadblocks for the connected and self-driving vehicle driving cars. This means we currently have an open road, as they say, to allow this technology to advance, including in Fairfax County, where it's being road tested today. Because we're planning for the future, we are partnering with the state on today's event. They're doing cutting-edge research that's being tested in Fairfax County, as well as local tech companies. We want to be in the lead when it comes to knowing the latest in this quickly evolving research and technology. People may not know that Fairfax County is the test track for this latest technology. We have more than 70 miles of smart roads in Fairfax County, forming a loop from I-66, 495, 95, and routes 29 and 50. The sensors or connected technology in these roads can talk to cars, equipped with sensors, and those cars can communicate back. Driverless cars will be here sooner than most people think. 2 years ago, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority polled residents about when they thought they'd see these cars on the road. 40% thought it would be between 11 to 20 years, and 16% said it would never happen. The reality is that it is only a couple years, the reality is only a few years away. For example, Ford says they will deliver fully autonomous cars for ride-sharing services by 2021, and Nissan is aiming to bring automated cars to market in the same time frame. So here in Fairfax County, we've committed to diversifying our economy, to focusing on creating innovation ecosystems for a variety of industries, but we're especially excited about this automated vehicle industry. And I am, fortunately, we are led in this effort by a great leader, our chairman, Sharon Bulova, and she's going to come up and speak for a moment here. I just wanted to say that Sharon is serving in her third term as chairman of the board. So that's almost 12 years, I think. And she was first elected in 2009 and previously had been the Braddock District supervisor for many years. So I'm very excited about the fact Sharon has set priorities for this county, and amongst those priorities is completing phase 2 of the Dulles Rail, transforming older commercial industries into vibrant mixed-use transit-friendly communities, and she is focused like a laser on attracting jobs and fostering the growth of exciting new industry sectors in Fairfax County. And that is what we are here to talk about today. So, Sharon Bova.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, John, for the work that you do as chairman of the Economic Advisory Commission. And that commission was established when the recession had first begun, and we knew that one of the things that we needed to do in Fairfax County was to stimulate our economy, get ourselves, back on our feet. And one of the major things that we have made as a focus is to diversify our industry sectors in Fairfax County. And so this is a time of innovation that is happening at lightning speeds. And so looking back just 5 years or 10 years ago, I think we're probably all pretty amazed at the things that we do and use today that didn't even exist just a few years before. These innovations are positively transforming our economy as well as how we live. We are a forward-thinking county that helps to foster and expand the innovation or the innovative work that's already happening here on the state and the local level. This is why we're holding today's event. It's a chance for us to help further develop Fairfax County as a hub for innovation, whether it's self-driving cars, biotech, like Innova's Center for Personalized Medicine, or data analytics, or cyber. When it comes to autonomous vehicles, I'm sure everyone knows the national headlines. Google, for instance, has reached the collective 2 million mile mark on the odometer for its self-driving cars, and Uber is testing driverless cars in Pittsburgh. Given what's happening, you may wonder about Fairfax County's role. Fairfax County is the test track for connected and automated vehicles in Virginia. You'll hear more about this from our panelists today, who are among the top researchers and thought leaders in the Commonwealth of Virginia. There are 70 miles of intelligent roads installed in Fairfax County, 70 miles, thanks to VDOT and the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, who are here today. This automated corridor is where researchers come to immerse their connected cars in real-world conditions. And we definitely have real-world conditions here in Northern Virginia. What researchers are learning from these road tests in Fairfax County is shaping the future for driverless technology. As we see truly autonomous cars hit the roads in the near future, it's going to have an impact on land use, transportation, public safety, the economy, and many other topics where local governments play a role. For example, driverless cars could lead to reduced traffic congestion and improve safety. Our roads are some of the most congested in the nation. But imagine a free flow of traffic to and from jobs and activities without traffic signals. Probably way in the future, but it is possible. Connected technology, or the sensors in vehicles and roads, would allow cars to communicate with each other and the infrastructure. This is happening already. This technology could keep cars moving at faster speeds with reduced space between them, and reduce or eliminate accidents that are a cause for congestion. This is exactly the kind of technology that's being tested here in Fairfax County. I hope you'll find today's event inspiring and valuable, and I hope that you'll join us again in the future, because this is just part of the beginning. And with that, I think Supervisor Fast is next up at the podium.
Thank you, Sharon. Before I introduce the moderator for our panel, I was wondering, I know, and therefore I would like to ask those members who serve on the Economic Advisory Commission who are here and or the Economic Development Authority, if you would rise so we can recognize the efforts that you make for us. Well, thank you very much. They put in a lot of time and effort, and it's paying off. So, 1776 is a startup incubator that is very prominent and doing very exciting things. And we're very fortunate today to have the managing director of 1776, David Zipper. He'll be our moderator. David works in the cities and transportation sectors, including venture investments into startups, as well as strategic relationships with corporations, associations, and local government worldwide. Prior to joining 1776, David oversaw economic development strategy for 2 mayors of Washington, D.C., including the launch of the D.C. Tech Incentives Program and the D.C. China Center in Shanghai. David was previously the executive director of New York City NYC Business Solutions under Mayor Bloomberg in New York City. And he worked with Harvard professor Michael Porter to develop strategies to create jobs across America's inner cities. Without further ado, I will turn it over to David, and he will introduce our panel members. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you, John. It's really a pleasure and a delight to be with all of you here in Fairfax today. I feel very fortunate, as John was saying. I get to play around with startups in the mobility and smart cities space every day, not just here in the DC region, but really all over the country and all over the world. I spent a lot of time in Detroit. As mentioned earlier, the Uber pilots in Pittsburgh, where we've done a lot of work with Uber and with Mayor Peduto in Pittsburgh. And I really think that today's topic is the most exciting change affecting mobility and cities, certainly in my lifetime. And I would argue really in the last 100 years, since, I guess, 1910s, when the Model Ts were rolling out of the line in Detroit. When you factor in what autonomous vehicles can do to change the ways that we commute, the ways that we move goods, the decisions we make about even owning vehicles, and you overlay that on top of concurrent changes and evolutions in electric vehicles and in ride sharing. I myself just took a Lyft to get here today. It's just a fascinating sort of combination of technologies. And we'll have a chance to talk about how a lot of those technologies are being developed right here in Virginia and in Fairfax. And I'm really looking forward to it. We'll have lots of time for conversation, so please jot down the questions you have as we go forward. So I'll very briefly introduce our panelists, and then they'll each have a few minutes for opening remarks. But I'll go down the list starting from my left. Kathy McGee is the director of the Virginia Transportation Research Council, which is responsible for all research at the Virginia DOT. In part, the council conducts research on intelligent transportation systems and driverless vehicles. And you're here from Charlottesville, correct?
Yes.
Great. Reg Varai is with the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, where he is a research associate with the Center of Advanced Automotive Research. And VTTI conducts research on autonomous vehicles, including using data acquisition systems developed in-house. So really glad to have you with us, Reg. John Estrada is the CEO of eTrans Systems, which develops software solutions for connected and autonomous vehicles right here in Fairfax County. Glad to have you with us, John. And then finally, Dwight Farmer is formerly the executive director of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission and the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, where he held those roles for 6 years. And now he is a senior advisor to the consulting firm RK&K, specializing in transportation and traffic engineering, as well as autonomous vehicle technologies. And he serves as an adjunct associate professor in the Transportation Research Institute of Old Dominion. So thanks to each of you for joining us today. Lots of conversation to come, but first, if we could turn to you, Kathy, really to kick things off. And if I could just lay the groundwork for us, what is the difference between autonomous and connected vehicles? What's the state of the technology nationally?
Okay, so I'm going to start with connected vehicles. How many of you have heard of a connected vehicle? If you're here today, you probably have. So the idea with a connected vehicle is that it's equipped to allow it to communicate with other vehicles as well as with the infrastructure. The primary means of communication today is dedicated short-range communications. So as long as you're within line of sight, you have a good chance of communicating with other vehicles in your range. By doing so, the vehicles, as they travel, they're broadcasting their location, speed, and heading 10 times a second, all anonymously. I don't care that it's you driving. I only know that there's a vehicle moving in a certain direction, going a certain speed at that point in time. What that does is that it provides a level of situational awareness that we wouldn't otherwise have. So if all vehicles are equipped in that way and broadcasting that information, I can create a map in my vehicle that allows me to know exactly what's going on around me. And when we begin to layer applications on top of that data, then we can do things like collision avoidance applications. We can prepare people for hard braking ahead of them by sending that information back. We can allow them to know that there's a vehicle approaching from their blind side that they wouldn't otherwise see. So we can provide warnings into the vehicle to the human driver. When we layer in the infrastructure piece of that, and we begin to communicate from the vehicle to the infrastructure and back again, then we are providing a level of information to our, I come from VDOT, so that's my perspective. We all of a sudden have information that we didn't have about our network before. We know where the slowdowns are occurring immediately because we're getting all this information 10 times a second from the vehicles. But we also can learn things that our current sensors don't allow us to know. If a vehicle should lose traction, for example, a message could be sent to the infrastructure along with the very localized temperature, and we could make a decision about what winter maintenance activities we need to send out to that particular location. Very, very powerful what this information can enable. Also on the infrastructure side, we can broadcast in real time signal status. So we can send to the vehicles that are equipped to receive it exactly what the signal status is at any given point in time. So we can alert vehicles that at their current speed and heading, they're going to encounter a red light, and they might as well begin to decelerate now, as opposed to slamming on the brakes at the last minute. Or even better, we can tell them if they maintain a speed of 35 miles per hour, they'll stay in the green band. And that just means they won't stop at a red light. They're going to hit those greens all the way down the arterial. And so that's sort of what we think of when we talk about connected vehicles. When we move into the automated world, everybody's mind jumps immediately to the driverless vehicle. But I think it's important, especially today, to talk about the fact there are lots of steps in between a completely driver-centric vehicle and that driverless vehicle. I personally, in my home fleet, have level 0 automation in all of my cars. So I'm responsible for all the driving functions, and I'm responsible for monitoring the driving environment. I have anybody have teenagers? Two teenage boys in my house, so I'm wishing for a little more automation. Level 1 automation gets you that cooperative adaptive cruise control that helps you maintain the appropriate distance between you and the vehicle in front of you. There might be some lane keeping assistance, but again, you're assisting the driver with these systems to handle that driving task, but he's still responsible for it. Level 2, if you rode in a Tesla today or the Audi that was out front, those are level 2 vehicles, so they're combining automated features, driver assist features, but the driver still needs to maintain control. No taking a nap in the vehicle yet. You still need to be aware of your environment and what's going on around you and make sure you're prepared to take control of the vehicle. Level 3 adds a little more, a bit more to the system, takes a bit more away from the driver in terms of what he needs to be doing in that automated vehicle. but it's still important for that driver to stay engaged. This is where it starts to get a little tricky for us in terms of safety, because the more driving task you take away from the driver, the less you maintain his or her attention. And so there's the risk that they become distracted and don't stay as engaged in the driving task. When we get to levels 4 and 5, that's really where the vehicle begins to take on those tasks almost completely, at least in certain situations, and you really can begin to check out a little more. But it's important to remember today, the vehicles you can buy on the lot are level 2, and you're still the driver, and it's important for you to remember that. What I like to talk about is connected automation. So we take those automated features and we layer on top of that situational awareness that we get from the connectivity. So it's not just the vehicle sensors then that you're relying on to maintain your driving. It's also the information from everything around you and anything from a DOT perspective that we might want to send you to help you in your driving task. We could tell you that you need to move left because there's an incident ahead, or you could be warned that there's a driver being occluded from your vehicle sensors that you need to know about. So connected automation is ultimately where I hope we go.
And before we go on, just paint the picture in terms of deployment. I know I was in Pittsburgh a few months ago and I saw one of the quote-unquote autonomous Ubers, which, as you probably know, is going to have somebody sitting right behind the steering wheel because that's required as part of the agreement to deploy those. But there's just last week, Arizona started doing some testing with Waymo, picking people up. Are people going to see these autonomous vehicles in a testing facility on roads here in Virginia or nationally, or where are the tests happening and how far along are they?
We are actually doing lots of testing right here in Fairfax County. The connected and automated corridors were mentioned earlier, and we're doing a lot of testing. Right now, you won't see a vehicle moving without a driver behind the wheel, but we're very lucky to partner with VTTI, and VDOT and VTTI jointly own and operate the Smart Road that's located in Blacksburg, which provides us that closed road testing opportunity for a lot of this technology. And we think that's really important, that we have that sort of stop-off point where we can make sure we're comfortable with the way the technology operates, how it interacts in a traffic environment before we bring it to the real world. But then we're very fortunate to have the facilities here where we can begin to see that real world testing as well. It's one thing to operate in a closed system where everything is controlled. It's very different to operate in an area like Fairfax County where you've got congestion, you've got emergency vehicles, you've got all those things you see on a day-to-day basis that the vehicle must deal with. So I think the testing is coming very, very soon, and I think you're going to see a lot of it right here in your backyard.
Well, that's a perfect segue over to you, Reg. Can you talk a bit more about the research and development work around AVs you're doing right here in Fairfax? And in particular, I think it'd be great to hear more about the Virginia Automated Corridors.
Perfect, awesome. Thank you, everybody. So I'm sure everyone realizes this area has a lot of traffic issues, a lot of problems that automated connected vehicles could solve. Do we all also agree that automated vehicles are there yet, or if we're willing to cede all that control? I don't think so. So what we're doing in this environment is understanding these type of factors by placing real vehicles in this environment. So the Virginia Automated and Connected Corridors comprises of all these various lanes, I-66, 495, where we get to test these vehicles, but also have the connected piece to it. And also these connected services to also enhance that capability. Also think about the connected vehicle systems in this area is that one of the most heavily instrumented highways in the whole entire world. So having that information and pushing that information to automated vehicles is great. So some of the technology, as Kathy alluded to, was tested or is being tested down in Blacksburg on the Smart Road. And we take some of those technologies and move them up here in real world environments. We could easily control for some of the situations where level 2 or level 3 technologies don't particularly work so well. And the main thing is really observing the human behavior behind these technologies. That's all said and done. Between level 2 and level 3, there's that gap. And these technologies are just hitting the roadways today. We want to understand what type of behaviors drivers get into, what type of risks they're engaging in, and if it's actually solving the problem or actually contributing to the issues. So what we do is that you guys may have seen outside is we actually include data acquisition systems inside of the vehicles. We have the ability to understand the performance of the vehicle, the algorithm itself, and also, more importantly, is to look at the behavior of the driver and how that changed the performance that drivers are doing. So you have various camera systems inside and also various connections to the network to understand the kinematics, the control of the vehicle itself. So we're working with a lot of different sponsors, Virginia Department of Transportation, of course. We also work with the United States Department of Transportation, where we're looking at using this data that we've acquired to understand these drivers to feed back into policy. In addition, more importantly as well too, is that we work with vehicle manufacturers, many in several private situations. This data we collect as well too supports them so they can understand driver behaviors and factors that they need to create new technologies for or controls to make sure that drivers don't engage in more risky activities. So it's also that feedback. Because right now we're in level 2, we're still at level 3, level 4, level 5. We know where technology is going to go. We just need to understand how do we implement that in a fashion that the human driver could take with it and actually drive correctly and not engage in bad behaviors. So some of the public studies are actually going out here in this area.
That's great. And before we move on, my understanding is that Virginia Tech is making some substantial investments in urban and rural research in particular. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Right, so some of the main things with it that automated vehicles do a really great job of driving on highways systems. They don't do a particularly great job in rural settings with a lot of windy roads, lane markings that aren't necessarily always there. So those are situations, and also GPS denied type situations. So what VTTI is doing down in Blacksburg is we're creating these type of environments, these rural settings where we could actually test automated vehicles in very fringe environmental cases and situations that may put the driver and the car at risk.
Interesting. That's great. All right, John. So you work in this space. You're in the middle of this space.
We do.
Nationally, you're right here in Fairfax. That's got to be pretty exciting. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on the opportunities you see being created as a business person in the county based on all the research taking place here.
Okay. Yeah, so we see Fairfax County as a huge opportunity for rolling out this technology and watching as it grows. I think there's going to be two ways that we see as we reach this automation. You know, one is the levels that Kathy was talking about, as vehicles and technology move to that. But the other way to do it, and the way to start with a fully autonomous vehicle, is to limit the area where it can operate, okay? So for example, an elevator is an autonomous vehicle, all right? Turns out when they first came, they had operators, they had drivers. Apparently it was a big deal to transition on that. Unfortunately, can't claim that I was there, and although sometimes it seems like it. And then we also see it in other limited areas. For example, if you fly out of Dulles and you go at a terminal A, B, or C, you're driving in or riding in an autonomous vehicle. Right? So as long as you can limit, where vehicles operate, you can begin to, advance some of the technologies quicker. One place you'll see it is on the highways. Driving on the highways, everything's faster, but there's, less interaction going on. The other place it's going to be is in urban environments with a limited area, with vehicles that are a limited speed. So vehicles that are only going to go 15, 20 miles an hour in a very tight area. And we have some super areas in Fairfax County to do that. Right? If you think back from when the Metro was originally conceived, its main goal was to take people from the suburbs into the city, which is where the jobs were. And back in like the 60s, when that's how the local economy worked. Well, over the last decades, right, that's changed a lot. Right? Fairfax County has grown incredibly. I moved here in 1970 something, and at that point, Tyson's Corner was an intersection and a mall and some car dealers. That was about it. It was one tall building, it was a bank. That's changed a lot now. So in an area like Tyson's Corner, in Reston, or in Merrifield, where there are subways, right, there are lots of job opportunities, but if people want to commute via the Metro to get there, they have a real challenge to connect that last mile. You can ride Uber or Lyft, but those are relatively expensive. And they're great kind of now and again, or if you're in the city where you don't have far to go. But an autonomous vehicle fleet in a dedicated area, so if you think about Reston, it would go from the subway, where the subway goes to Reston Town Center to, up and down Sunrise Valley and Sunset Hills would be an ideal place to connect people from wherever in Fairfax County, in the district, in Arlington, to the jobs that are in all those areas, as well as the restaurants and places to go. So that's how we see this coming sooner rather than later. There's pilots happening today in numerous places in the country, as well as overseas in the UK, Singapore. And we think that's a key part of this expansion, and an area that Fairfax County would be a very logical place to do that. Following up on something that Kathy said, can we bring up the slides? All right, so I didn't try this without looking, so just going to give you a little warning, because there's a lot of clicks involved. Okay, all right, so one of the things that we also think is important is you hear a lot about, well, at least we do, if you're in the industry, you may or may not follow it, but does autonomous vehicle really need connectivity, right? And we strongly believe that it does, and you'll hear people claim that it doesn't. And so we did a little case study, right, of a crash that happened in Arizona. So Uber is also testing its autonomous vehicles in Arizona, all right? And basically, I'll just read the quote. It said, Tempe police cited a driver for making an illegal left turn. That's the H for the Honda in the picture. Oh, I guess it's up there, sorry. For making an illegal left turn and hitting one of Uber's test Volvos while it was in self-driving mode. The Uber SUV, occupied by a test driver and engineer in the passenger seat, flipped on its side, and a third car was struck. And actually, two cars were struck. So if you click, okay. The Honda was turning left, but because there were stopped vehicles on both sides of the intersection in the closer two lanes, it didn't see the Uber. Go ahead, click one more time. All right, so here's our little simulation.
Awesome.
All right, did they hit?
Yeah.
Okay.
It hit and spun around.
It hit. All right, so now the Uber was going 38 miles an hour and the light had changed yellow. So I guess under the law, the car turning left was the one on fault, but you probably shouldn't have gone 38 miles an hour when there were a bunch of stopped cars and the light had changed to yellow. So now, if we look at it, go to the next slide. Okay, if we look at this again, had they been equipped with the DSRC technology, right, the Honda would have still wanted to turn left. All right, let's click again. However, with V2V, click one more time.
And again, DSRC is connected vehicle technology.
Oh,
right?
sorry, thank you. You get caught up in your own little world. And then, right, in this case, they wouldn't have hit because they would have been notified ahead of time. Both vehicles could have slowed down, and then they could have seen each other and driven happily on their way. All right, one more time. We won't go through this one in any detail because no one warned you that there'd be math. But we did the math behind it, and basically, based on the Uber going 38 miles an hour and the Honda going 10 miles an hour, which is just an estimate, that wasn't in the reports, they would have been going at each other at a total of 22 meters per second, which means they would have had 7 seconds warning. And so with 7 seconds warning, both vehicles would have had enough time to slow down, figure out what's really going on, and avoid hitting each other. And everyone live happily ever after. So anyway.
Thank you, John.
Our little pitch on why you need both.
I like it.
With excellent illustrations. All right, and Dwight, we talked a lot about the state of the technology, but I think we'll spend a lot of time, I think, in the subsequent conversations thinking about ramifications for people's lives, and those will be both medium-term and long-term ramifications. So maybe since you have a background in planning, getting your perspective on how autonomous vehicles are going to affect long-run transportation planning of municipalities and regions, but particularly here in Fairfax, I think would be great.
Okay. I think what I'll try to do is do this with a series of slides. I promise you, if I keep on track, I can do this in 4.5 minutes, but can we get the next slide up? Is it a set of slides? Is it up? Okay. So I have a series of slides I think that will take us through some new concepts, at least new to some of you folks, that will impact the long-range transportation planning process. So first, what are the potential impacts of these autonomous vehicle technologies? Now, I'm an engineer, I'm a math kind of guy, so I have to, like John, throw out a couple numbers here. But let me start with a statistic that we get in traffic engineering 101. At 60 miles an hour, in case you were wondering, way in the evening while you're trying to sleep, how far am I traveling in a second at 60 miles an hour? It's 88 feet. So at an expressway, we're easily traveling 100 feet in 1 second. That's a blink. And for a guy like me, as I was telling Reg out in the parking lot, on my good day, it's about 1.5 seconds before I perceive there's an event going on and get my foot on the brake pedal. So that's about 150 feet of spacing that I will go through just perceiving and reacting. So autonomous vehicle technology is about minimizing that perception reaction time. So my first bullet here says that if, and I would say it's more than an if, I think we're certainly going to be able to do this with full market penetration with autonomous vehicles, but if we can eliminate most of that, then essentially we could theoretically, until full market penetration, reduce our spacing in half and increase our capacity by almost 100%, just from eliminating this lag of perception and reaction. You also get from autonomous vehicle technology the capability to, and I have here conservatively, increase our travel speeds, again with full market penetration, easily 20%. Now to pause right here, and there is something that I'd like to pass along. I passed along to one of the media folks here earlier this afternoon. It's something that stuck with me for many, many years. I won't tell you how long. But it came to me from an old railroad guy, and I think, Sharon, you know this gentleman that sat on the board with us many years ago. This railroad guy impressed upon me that in an urban area or even in inter-urban travel, it's not how fast you can go, it's how often you don't go slow. Think about that one for a while. It's continued to haunt me. And the evolution of fail-safe autonomous vehicle technology, as some of the panelists have already highlighted, we are very confident in this. It will, again, with full use here, reduce accidents, injuries, and fatalities. And if you haven't been familiar with the fatality rate, it is one of my pet peeves. We are still losing 35,000 to 40,000 people a year just in the U.S. through fatalities due to roadway crashes. Next slide, please. All right, can I do these from here? Okay. So what about the future of public transportation and autonomous vehicle technology? Well, it'll depend, because I don't want to prognosticate here, but it depends on these 3 bullets in my mind. The establishment of new and evolving safety standards, government regulations, and operating standards. And then the big one here, as any of the elected officials will tell you here, it really depends on how much money is going to flow from federal and state sources, and then local sources have to match with that. So prognosticating a timeline for autonomous vehicle technology and long-range plans for public transportation is a very, very difficult thing to do. Next slide, please. So what comes next? And this is the one that I am really most excited about. The young, the elderly, and the handicapped, and I have may on the slide. I wish I had said will significantly have improved mobility in the future. I am very confident in that as this technology matures. Changing completely here in the second bullet from a business model perspective, lowering operating costs. Think about it like a guy like John will tell you as a business person. Lowering operating costs are huge. And I think that this particular phenomenon will have historic implications on transportation services. It just changes everything. And then the third bullet that I'm very excited about is that a lot of folks who are in the business of predicting the business side of transportation will say shared ownership will evolve into new and expanded business opportunities. And I think it'll be something like we've never seen before. Next slide, please. So looking forward, I'd like to pose 8 what I think are extremely important questions and issues to consider. Will increased capacity reduce congestion? I think the answer is definitely yes. Will increased capacity reduce the need for future capital improvements? When we go to the elected officials and say, well, maybe we don't need to build as much. Well, I have to pause on that one because the next question says, but will there be, when you free up space and add more capacity, will there be latent demand that all of a sudden blossoms? People I know, friends of mine in Fairfax, don't take trips in certain times of the day and certain days of the week because they're not sure when they can get there or if they can get there in a timely manner. So I think latent demand is there, and it may consume a lot of that freed up capacity. Next slide, please. So will latent demand then negate, at least to some degree, increases in capacity? Probably so. Will modal choice behavior change? Modal choice is a complex phrase there that we certainly don't have time to get into today, but I think how we choose to travel is definitely going to change. And I follow that with, will there be a blending of the capabilities of autonomous vehicle technologies between private autos and public transportation? And I think very likely. Next slide. So finally, in my series of 8 questions, so how and when will technologies be incorporated into commercial vehicles? Will business models and personal demand for goods and services change significantly? So the answers are on the next slide. And it's a pretty simple set of answers. The answers to all of those questions are yes, significantly, and sooner than we think. I think we're about to witness extraordinary times in my life. So next slide, please. So the question of the long-range transportation plans. Over the next 20 years, travel demand, I believe, will undergo changes we've not seen in the last 50 to 100 years. And the nature of car ownership and public transportation will change historically. Next slide, please. So specifically on the long-range plans, the implications on the need for new capital improvements will absolutely be significant. How we travel and how we conduct business will be redefined, and I say most importantly, improvements to mobility around the globe will be transformational, around the globe. So I'm going to leave you with the last slide. My friend Barry Brandt with RK&K and some friends of his left me with this slide with the cartoon here, and I want you to know, John, I do remember the original series of this cartoon series coming out on television, and I believed when I was a young kid, this is the way I was going to ride in a car. And if you notice, it all looks different. I don't see 4 tires on here, so I've been depressed up until the last 3 or 4 years, so now I'm a very excited guy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks to all of you. Now we'll have some conversation. I've got a few questions to kick things off, but there'll be lots of time for audience questions as well. So jot them down, and we'll come to you in just a little bit. But first, actually several people mentioned congestion as a differentiator in Fairfax County compared at least to a couple other parts of the country where a lot of AV research is taking place. I'm thinking of Michigan, and I'm thinking of Pittsburgh. They don't quite have Fairfax levels of congestion, although Northern California debatably could. I'm just wondering how you think, or whether it's relevant for AV testing, what it means for the research, and if it's actually potentially an advantage in certain ways. Anyone?
I'll start. I think it definitely is an advantage when you begin to think about how these vehicles will need to operate in a real-world environment. When you're operating as a human driver in a less congested environment, you tend to probably also be less aggressive about your own driving. There's no need to be an aggressive driver when it's not congested. I would argue that there are a handful maybe, of aggressive drivers in Fairfax County. And
it's like 3 of them, right?
Three,
That's all.
yeah.
They make a real mess.
Yeah. And when you are an aggressive driver, you tend to make unexpected moves. You change lanes very quickly. You race up and then brake because you have to. Those are all things that, that can create challenges for human drivers and will create challenges for these automated systems. So I think the ability to test in an environment like this is really, really important to the future development of these systems.
Other thoughts?
I guess to add on to that point, as far as the research that we're doing here, we do have vehicles out there outfitted with some of our data acquisition systems. We also are capturing these type of events that we could utilize eventually in the future to drive some of the new algorithms that are being developed with these car manufacturers. So we also have that aspect from camera views and everything in this environment. So we have some of that data that we're able to leverage to support that.
And just if I could jump back, and not related to the congestion necessarily, but you also have a very tech-savvy community here. And I think that you're going to be able to find people who are more willing to try the technology out and give you that feedback because they're more accepting of it in general. And you know, other communities are going to be less so just by their demographics. And so I think you have that working in your favor here as well.
That's great. All right, let's dive into a meaty question. This is one that I think a lot about. You know, obviously autonomous vehicles have attracted a lot of enthusiasm, shall we say, from people who are really excited about it and others who are less excited about it. So I'll offer 2 visions of an autonomous vehicle future to the panelists. I'd love to get your perspective on them. They're very different. The first is from Mark Fields, who's the CEO of Ford, and he's very bullish on autonomous vehicles. And he said very explicitly, he wants to sell millions of autonomous vehicles to people in the US as quickly as possible. He's all in. He wants to be able to go to a Ford dealership and buy your autonomous vehicle there. Now, the alternative vision is one from Robin Chase. And I don't know if you guys know Robin Chase. She's one of the founders of Zipcar and is very much an urban mobility guru. And she literally said that version of Mark Fields articulated for autonomous vehicles was her version of hell, literally. And she said, because what she's worried about, she thinks that in a world where everyone has their own autonomous vehicle, you will face, and I want to get this right, you face situations where you're going to have zombie cars, as she calls them, circling cities in particular because they're delivering toothpaste that somebody ordered from CVS at 11 at night and they didn't feel like going out to get it themselves. And honestly, why consolidate your various errands into one trip when various autonomous vehicles will deliver it to you? So she's literally suggested that we regulate autonomous vehicles so that no individual can own them, and they have to be used for rideshare. These are very different perspectives on what the future of autonomous vehicles will look like. I'm not expecting you to pick one or the other, but I'd love to get your perspectives on what lies ahead.
Gotcha. I guess I could take some of that point. I guess I'll side on the Ford aspect of it. So there's various things of automated vehicles, right? We went over the steps of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 when there's complete seated control. I think in the systems that you see today, automated vehicles actually save lives, right? If we're talking about what we could buy off the road or buy off the shelf, there's a whole bunch of safety systems added up together to ultimately make the car driverless. But the first thing is, it's actually keeping the passenger and other people around the roadways safe. The Department of Transportation say that there's like 80 to 90% of all crashes and deaths on the road can be prevented by automated type of vehicles. Last year, or 2015, DOT published that 32,000 people died, 6 million crashes. If we could take that number down by 80 to 90%, imagine those type of impacts. So that's, I guess, that side of the story that I'll take is that, yeah, we probably need more of these systems to see the type of behaviors that everyone gets into in their car, texting and driving. To a certain extent, I think some of these technologies are actually saving us from ourselves.
I would add that I think we're gonna land somewhere in the middle.
I had a feeling you might say that.
That's the weasel way out, isn't it? But I really think it's going to depend somewhat on where you live and what kind of travel you do. I think in urban areas where you have relatively short trips, you don't use a car every day, I think you will see more car sharing because the car can come to you and pick you up, and I think that's a real advantage. As a traffic engineer, my nightmare, my version of the nightmare, is this concept of we don't need parking lots anymore because the car can drop you at the restaurant and then circle the block until you finish dinner. I don't need that. I don't need 40,000 cars circling the block while people enjoy their dinner downtown. So I don't think we're going all the way there, but I do think we're going to see something in between where there are lots of people who do invest in their personal automated vehicle, and it takes them to work and then perhaps goes further out to park during the day and then comes back for them. I've heard people talk about the model where it brings you to work and then it becomes a shared vehicle during the day and then comes back for you. I think these are all interesting concepts. As a society, I think we're very protective of our right to drive. We like our cars, we like our, again, I have teenage boys, my car is full of stuff all the time. And so I wonder what I would do with that if I didn't have a car to keep it in anymore. I really think we're going to land somewhere in the middle. I think there are tons of opportunity for the shared use mobility, and the first mile, last mile piece of it is tremendously promising, but I think there will always be a segment of the population that wants their own car.
Interesting. Well, let me play devil's advocate on one piece of that, which is the congestion piece. I hear you. I think there's one of this zombie car idea of cars circling the restaurant while you're eating is one I think everyone says that's really not what we want societally. But let me ask you a question about induced demand. I think you'll know that term. You know exactly where I'm going. But the idea is that if you know, we talked about how great it is that with autonomous vehicles you could have a more capacity for cars on a given stretch of highway, which means you can fit more. Obviously, the travel with the same number of vehicles would be faster in a congested area. You could potentially multitask. That's what a lot of people are excited about while you're in an autonomous vehicle. So in an area like Fairfax, which is a lot of people commuting into Northern Virginia, close to the district or into the district, you know, if it feels like, okay, you know, an autonomous trip feels like it could be, you know, I have more control, it's desirable. Maybe I would have otherwise maybe taken public transit or worked from home, but now I think I'm just going to take an autonomous vehicle. Would you end up in a world where you just have exactly the same congestion that we do right now, just with an autonomous vehicle built congestion versus standard cars? Yeah, go ahead, Dwight.
David, I sort of hit on that, and I'm glad you brought up, you used that word, induced demand.
Induced demand.
Yeah, I quoted a statistic out in the parking area here with another colleague about that particular instance. I have some statistics that I probably should share. Over about a 20-25 year period, my agency collected information as VDOT was adding lanes to our interstate system in Hampton Roads. I mean, we had a build period, so we had a lot of good stuff going on. And we always had the opportunity to do before and after. The interesting statistic that we found was whenever we added a unit of capacity to that interstate highway or expressway, 50% of that capacity was consumed within 6 months. So there could be a debate, have we induced, because we have, as you suggested, freed up space, and somebody scratched their head and said, well, I'm going to take a trip, or we think there's a whole lot of, I really would like to have made that trip, but I wasn't going to take a chance crossing Fairfax County or going from south side to north side of Hampton Roads. And so now that I know I can make it in a predictable amount of time, I'm going to make that trip. So I think there is a significant, because building roadways, as our VDOT friends would tell you, we're always in a lag position. We're always building something we should have built 10 or so or more years ago. So I think there is currently a lot of pent-up latent demand. and that could be confused as induced demand. But I've seen new interstate highways in Hampton Roads that didn't generate the new traffic, but just used it as a relief valve. So there's a little bit of yes and no in that. And I think, as one of my slides said, it may all come out in a wash, which means we're doing a lot more traveling, but we're still facing a significant amount of challenge for congestion and so forth. So I don't know that we can build our way out of this even with the technology, but we'll be doing things we've never dreamed of, I think, in the future with this.
Yeah, but I won't care.
You
I won't, because now I sit in my car, I'm supposed to pay attention, I'm not
right.
supposed to send text messages. I probably shouldn't be eating and talking on the phone as well, but everybody does that. So, you know what, now I can sleep in the car. I can plan to leave the house an hour earlier if my commute goes, because I'll just sleep in the car. I'll get one of those cars that has a full bed, the business class equivalent.
So you'll be fine, in other words, with more congestion that means a longer commute, because you'll be living it up. You'll be fine in your autonomous slow trip.
I've seen studies where Google's, I don't know if this was true or just someone's conjecture, was they were building driverless cars in large part because that would free up people's time to be doing searches on the internet, and they could send more ads, right? Or you could have, in the car could be an ad. So yeah, I think all these are possibilities. I think definitely some people will move further out. Some people will move further in and get rid of their cars. There's no one single answer. And one thing, like in the toothpaste example, that could have been sent in a shared vehicle anyway, in an Uber today. I was at this restaurant in Merrifield the other day. There were 3 different delivery services for this restaurant. So there's all sorts of competition. So, the fact that I can do a lot more in my car, or legally do a lot more in my car, people will be willing to spend more time, and they'll look different, right? I mean, today, everything in the car is all centered around an engine and a driver. You don't have to have the driver. You can do a lot more things. I can, sleep. I fall asleep easily in vehicles, so that'd be good for me.
You're really excited about this technology.
I am. Well, one time I had to go down to Richmond, and I was stuck in traffic, surprise, surprise, and I was thinking about that. Would I ride in a 25-mile-an-hour vehicle if I could? And I concluded I would. I would have left at 2 a.m. There may have still been traffic. I would have gone 25 miles. I'd have slept the whole way, and I could even get the special one with the shower in it.
Well, John, I feel like you're a little bit of a special case in this way. I respect your point, but to bring it back a little bit, some people think about autonomous vehicles say, well, the way that they would respond to this question saying, oh, it's going to lead to just as bad congestion, saying, no. Autonomous vehicles can actually unlock lots more people to solve that last mile problem to public transit. And the fact of the matter is, when you have a metro car full of people, that is a very space-efficient way of transporting them compared to vehicles of any kind, even bikes. So, or others don't feel that way and say, actually, no, autonomous vehicles could end up really competing with public transit, and you'll end up actually driving people away from it, which means congestion is going to be worse. So this is in a large county in a metro region like Fairfax. I think this is a really important question. So we'd love to hear your perspectives on the relationship between autonomous vehicles and public transportation. Is it symbiotic or is it competitive?
Oh, can I start there?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think that it can be both. I think the first mile, we had a really great conversation this morning about solving that first mile, last mile problem, where, in a special case where there's a barrier, right? Transit's only going to get you so far. How do you get the rest of the way? And I think the idea of an autonomous shuttle is very, very powerful. Right now, those folks have no choice but to drive because there's a link missing in their trip. So I think in those kinds of cases, the autonomous shuttle that takes you that first mile, last mile, could really increase transit usage. There is also a very real fear, though, that if I can sleep in my car, why go through the trouble of riding metro when I can be more comfortable, not have to sit next to my smelly seatmate, and live further out?
Don't take it personally there.
Oh, no. I'm short. I don't know how many of you might be vertically challenged, but the Metro on a summer day is not a good place for a short person. Just saying. So, you know, if I can do work in my car, even if it takes me an hour and a half to do that commute, but I can spend that time very efficiently, I might make that choice to switch away from transit. And I think there's a real concern about that in terms of how we provide then enough capacity to meet the need.
David, I did a calculation during some of my previous research a year or so ago.
He really does like math.
And I'm just I wake up thinking about math things and challenges, but...
And the Jetsons.
And the Jetsons, yeah. I wish I had one of those. Think of a bus lane. So for a major urban area like Fairfax, Northern Virginia, DC metro area, New York City, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, LA, and a whole host of others, a dedicated bus lane, seated passengers in an autonomous public transportation vehicle spaced a quarter-mile apart at 60 miles an hour will handle 8 times the capacity of a vehicle today and 4 times the capacity of the numbers you saw me put up there for an autonomous privately owned vehicle. So there's no question in my mind that this unveiling of the autonomous vehicle technology into public transit systems will have a radical change and a radical impact, historic impact, on how major urban hubs travel and are connected to one another.
All right. I'm going to ask one last question myself and would love to get questions from the audience, so jot them down. But my last question is going to be one about who the first beneficiaries or the deepest beneficiaries of autonomous vehicle technology are going to be. Because I think right now, if you have in your mind someone who's right today using an autonomous vehicle, probably, if you're like me at least, or like people I talk to, you're thinking of someone who's really excited about the autopilot feature at Tesla that they bought, and they bought their Tesla for $100,000, and it means they're part of the 1% in all likelihood. And there's a lot of thought saying those are actually the people who could get very excited about autonomous vehicles first, the ones that can pay a lot of money to have their own. But they're not the only ones who are really excited. And there are people like that, but they're not the only ones who are excited about autonomous vehicles. Particularly, there's advocates for groups of people like the elderly or those who are blind, groups of people that have real mobility challenges, who look at autonomous vehicle technology once it's fully available as freeing them in a way that they've never been free before. So very different visions of who the beneficiaries of autonomous vehicle technology are going to be first. And would love to hear the panel's perspective on who you think is going to reap the most benefit.
So it's going to be the people who drive near my parents. They shouldn't be driving, but they don't want to give up that mobility. They live in Williamsburg. There is Uber, but it's very spotty. So it took me a while to teach my mom how to use Uber, but she can do it, but there's not always cars available. So, they're driving around, doing the best they can, but it's scary. And, so I think it's the people, especially as the population ages, I think that's going to be the biggest beneficiary in the near term. It's people who otherwise can't or shouldn't be driving, because you don't want to give up that mobility. I totally understand that part of it.
Well, and I think some of those folks are going to be able to benefit even now, even at the lower levels of automation, because we're seeing these systems that remind you when you start to wander out of your lane or are getting too close to the vehicle in front of you. So I think from a safety perspective, just those little assistance features can be really, really helpful to a wide swath of the population. But clearly, if we can begin to bring people back into this realm of mobility as the automation gets higher and higher and really the system is operating the vehicle, I think that has profound effects. I'm sure there are statistics out there, I don't have them on hand, about how quickly the elderly's health and just life situation deteriorates when they lose their mobility, when they can't get out and connect with their friends anymore. And so I really believe that that's where we're going to see just amazing benefits from the technology. But it's going to take a while, because for them to see that benefit, we really need to get to the higher levels of automation where they aren't responsible for the operation of the vehicle.
Do you feel like for those groups, those groups that have mobility needs like that, that an autonomous shuttle could potentially provide their needs beyond an individual car? That's one thing that I've thought about, is the rich are going to want their autonomous, awesome car to go drive in, but there may be a very different societal need.
The shared use definitely is, yeah.
Any thoughts?
David, I had indicated in one of the slides the elderly, which I am assuming that as I get to that stage of John's parents, that I can still be mobile and not have to worry about the impairments I have just from aging. But Kathy's children's children, I would prognosticate today, probably will not need a driver's license, that the vehicle will be licensed, and they will be very mobile, even at a very young age. And then I think globally, and even in the U.S., those who could not normally afford a $25,000, a $35,000, or $120,000 car can probably afford something in a shared ride system and become more mobile than they are today. So I think it's going to be transformational for those categories that you outlined. So.
That was actually an interesting point that you mentioned. And I had a discussion too with my coworker earlier today. Was with automated vehicles, maybe that model will inverse. So automated vehicles will essentially be cheaper because there's in mass production. Then the freedom to drive your own vehicle actually costs more due to insurance or just the vehicle being manufactured a certain way. So there could be that potential long-run future where that model just gets inversed.
Interesting. It could be. Why don't we pause there? I'd love to hear questions from the audience. I think I may need to yield my mic to do so.
My hands are going.
Thank you. Very interesting. My question is really directed more toward Kathy and I think John. Kathy, the governor has said we're going to keep our regulatory infrastructure minimal in relation to autonomous vehicles to entice the industry to Virginia. And at the same time, regulation can be constraining, but can also be enabling, right? So we at the local level have authority to do land use planning, comprehensive plans, and zoning ordinance, and we, in fact, at Fairfax, have Tyson's, we have Merrifield. We're going to do an embark down the Richmond Highway. There are opportunities for us to collaborate with industry in a constructive, enabling way. And have you given thought to that? And John, as a resident of Fairfax and an entrepreneur, have you given thought to how you engage local government in a way that will be facilitative of your technology?
So we are definitely interested in encouraging that local level collaboration, and we did think very hard about this whole legislative piece and what it means. But when we looked out to other states who jumped out ahead and did enact that legislation, almost 100% of them, I would say, have found that there are at least some negative unintended consequences that occurred as a result of the legislation. So certainly if there are things that we can do at the state level to enable collaboration at the local level, we definitely want to do that. We're talking to a number of groups now who are interested in doing some pilot type activities, and we certainly want to participate and support that in any way that we can. I don't know at this point how legislation would enable that beyond what we're currently doing.
We already have the legislation. We don't need the state to help us with our enabling activities. But I do think there's a place for that engagement to leverage infrastructure.
Yes. We think that's a great opportunity. Those sort of urban cores provide really great opportunities for a lot of this autonomous shuttle conversation that we've been having. It solves the problems that are currently existing within those cores, and it also gives us a great opportunity to do some really interesting testing in an interesting environment.
Thank you for the question. Right, yep.
Oh, John had a
So, yeah, so we're very interested in working more closely with the state. We've done actually some research, got some research grants out of the Center of Innovative Technology. The building kind of looks like that out near Dulles. And you know, definitely see that as a partnership. I mean, all the things we're trying to do eventually end up on public roads, so you gotta participate, so.
Ryan Jones, thank you very much. This is excellent. Thinking more project focused and getting on a specific pilot project that you discussed, what steps would we need to take, public and private partnerships for hardware, rolling stock, and software, and obstacles would there be to launch a pilot project of low-speed shared autonomous minibuses in the Reston or Tysons area, going to and from metro stations up to a few miles on just approved roads, and what would be the benefits to the community of such a pilot project?
Guess that's me again. So I'll give you my card. But I think in general, we're looking for those kinds of opportunities. Clearly, you're going to start with baby steps, right? So you're not going to send a completely autonomous shuttle out on day one. We're going to start with an operator there to take over if there is an issue. But we definitely are looking for those kinds of opportunities. Now, whether or not we have the funding to do all the things we'd like to do today, that's always a challenge. But there are opportunities out there. There are grants at the federal level. There are opportunities. So I think we just need to talk about what you'd like to see and what it would look like, and go from there.
Yeah, right over here in the front.
Right here?
Oh, you can start there. That's fine. We'll come up later. Okay. We'll get you.
Yeah, I'm Andy Rudin. I'm a lifelong resident of Northern Virginia, so I understand traffic. I really appreciate this discussion. One of the issues in our society today is a growing divide between rich and poor. And I've noticed that one place that's prominently not manifest is in traffic. So around Tysons, for example, Bentleys and Civics and Hyundais all get stuck the same way, and they fester in the same traffic. Now we have hot lanes, though, and so as one who's paid $12 certain hours of the day, certain days of the week to get from the toll road down to 395 South, I recognize we're sort of pushing into a two-tiered system, and working in IT as I do, I also know that autonomy or autonomous vehicles are algorithmically driven and, or they're governed by algorithms, and what would stop, I mean, theoretically, the algorithm could assign priority to a higher paying customer to extend the duration of a traffic light, for example, or to move somebody through traffic faster than somebody else. So, whereas now we have everybody get stuck the same way, from a public policy perspective, how are we going to handle that? Where do you see the risks and dangers? And then for the politicians in the room, what would stop a local government from saying, hey, you know, we can sell some priority chips to the local residents here and we can zip them right through our traffic, and the others, well, sorry. So I'm just kind of interested in your perspectives on equality as far as that's concerned.
That's an interesting question. Who wants to take a first cut at that one? Keep smiling, Kathy.
Well, actually, I mean, I think it would be, you know, policy and government for deciding whether to do that. You know, we decided to do hot lanes, which give you the same sort of capability that you're talking about with the traffic lights. You could also I mean, that could be a way also to do some of the other concerns, like you could give priority to shared vehicles or transit vehicles, right? So that you can make that path go faster. And we even have some of that today, like if you're going on the 267 after, as you're approaching the intersection with 66, there's bus-only lanes, right? So I don't know that that's, governments have to look at a variety of ways to raise money, right? And that may be something that someone eventually decides to do.
So I don't think we're going to sell priority at the signal, although, I will say, right, so I do think a day will come when we say, okay, we're going to take these express lanes and we're going to make them automated vehicle lanes. Because of the fact that we can control safety, so we know there are going to be a lot fewer crashes, and they can keep themselves spaced correctly. So there's benefit from a mobility and safety perspective to converting that lane to an AV lane. And certainly, we're looking in the connected vehicle world, we're already looking at how we can make our transit signal priority smarter. So we don't want to give priority to an empty bus. There's no point in that. But if we can sense information, if the signal can receive information, this is a full bus, give it priority, then that makes sense to do from a people moving perspective. Now, just because your car costs a whole lot more doesn't mean we're going to give you priority at the signal. We won't control what goes on in terms of the algorithm within your vehicle. But as long as we maintain control of the signal operations themselves, I don't see that happening, except in the case of transit vehicles, because we want to promote that people moving capacity, and in the case of emergency vehicles. So we see a lot of benefit there as well.
So one thing we skipped over in our introductory conversation that could be helpful is just talking briefly about the role of the federal, state, and local governments in regulating AVs, because it's obviously in the federal interest that if you have an autonomous vehicle, it shouldn't be legal in one state, then suddenly illegal when you cross state lines. And also, it's in the federal interest to make sure that car maker X doesn't create an algorithm that gives prioritization in some capacity to other cars of the same make, or things like that, right? So thoughts on what's regulated at what level? I know there's some documentation about this that probably all the panelists are familiar with.
Let me kick it off, David. I think I've seen some strange research in the past year that has to do with pricing, meaning bidding for access to a Hampton Roads Bridge tunnel at rush hour. It's scary, I think is what Kathy was getting at, is you start to cross lines of all sorts of issues of fairness and equity, and the federal government has regulations on environmental justice and so forth, and so it gets very scary. But I think we have not yet conceived of the pricing policies that will follow this technology. And I think rather than get wrapped around the current pricing policies that we currently employ, I would say I'd be excited about new opportunities for new pricing mechanisms, the likes of which we've not yet conceived.
Okay. So we had, do you have the mic now? No, where's the mic? Okay, okay. Eventually, this gentleman's been waiting, but go ahead.
Okay, I just want to commend Fairfax County for sponsoring this event. I think it's really informative and very wonderful. Thanks to the panel and for all the great information. I work on the staff of the Transportation Planning Board in the Washington region. Specifically, I work in forecasting. There's a lot of interest in this particular subject. What we're doing currently is we're applying travel forecasting models that are based on observed travel behavior, how people are behaving today. And a lot of our decision makers are thinking about how this new technology will influence the forecasts. I would just be interested in getting your feedback on how this new technology might influence, or I guess, how should the forecasting methods be altered to account for this new technology in a 20-year forecast? You know, I work on the long-range plan, so Dwight's comment on the long-range plan resonated with me. So I think that I'm interested in any guidance you might provide on how we may account for this new technology in the forecasts that are developed by, models that are calibrated on today's travel behavior.
So we participated in a workshop at the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission in the fall, Mike Mullenhour and I, And it was all about scenario planning. And that's the tack that they're taking, because we don't have solid answers right now. Will ADT go up or will it go down? Will single car occupancy go up or will it go down? Or occupancy. And so we're guessing, but we can sort of bound our guesses, and we can say, if it takes this track, then this is what we can expect. But if it takes this track, then we're going to have to expect something very different. I don't know of a better way to do it right now. There are just too many unknowns. This whole idea about car ownership and whether people will shift to the share ride, and even if they do, does that actually mean more travel? In terms of if those cars are on the road all the time, ADT may very well go up. Even if car ownership goes down, all those sort of traditional inputs are out the window now, and we're having to sort of reset. And I think there's going to be a lag before we can catch up and really feel like we're doing a good job again in terms of forecasting that far out into the future. I think we can do a pretty good 5-year window, but beyond that, I would be very hesitant to bet my savings on a long-range forecast. Scenario planning. What if?
There's technologies that don't exist today that will significantly impact that forecast. That, I don't know how like you say, you can maybe bound the problem or look at, here's trends we need to monitor to see which way we're headed, but 20 years from now, it's going to look different. You can count on that. I'll put that in writing.
Fair. Yep, go ahead.
So I think there's a lot of policy questions that we're asking about today, but one of the new technologies that are coming along with automation is electrification. And electrification changes the whole value proposition as far as collecting fuel tax along with raising the fuel standards. So when we're talking about zombie cars, we're going to have to figure out how we price transportation, because if nobody's paying taxes, our roads are going to fall apart. So if we start charging by the mile, then that could be a zombie car solution. So I guess the question is, how do you all see the policy framing how this technology works in the end? Because there's technology, but it's also how we guide it as well.
Okay, go ahead, Dwayne.
David, this is the wrong place and the wrong time to answer that question. I'll tell you, I haven't worked with legislators for most of my career. We have presented them with those facts about fuel efficiency and CAFE standards, and all of those folks were warned many, many years ago in my career prior to the '86 change in the special session. And faced with that, it's a legislative change. It's a process that'll have its own drivers, no pun intended. And I think eventually we have to change the pricing program completely. We have to turn it upside down.
If I understand the question, I think you actually asked two really good questions in one. One was the impact of electrification, electric vehicles on the whole autonomous conversation, which I think is a great point, and one that I'd be interested to hear thoughts on that. For example, electric vehicles have many fewer parts than internal combustion engine parts. So maybe we have longer life and lower maintenance costs of AVs. That becomes interesting. But then you also asked about the question of how you actually charge for usage and the regulatory role, which is a very deep question. And we've touched on it a little bit, but let me see if I can first just see if anyone has thoughts on the EV piece, because I don't think we've talked about that yet.
Right, so I had an interesting thought about the electric vehicle piece. As you mentioned zombie cars, what if those cars have fuel packs in them, and they go into, say, a parking garage, and what they do is they offload some of their electricity to protect that grid or add some more energy to that grid. So not necessarily just driving around, now it's actually doing some positive impact in that particular region from an energy standpoint. So I guess that's one potential use case infrastructure type of idea.
Well, David, you talk about electrification, but I'd say just step back a moment. We learned 10 or 15 years ago, about 10 years ago, another one of those calculations, Kathy, where we were talking about how much, legislators would ask us, how much do I need to raise the gas tax? On a Camry type vehicle, we lose money from a gas tax on that vehicle. That vehicle is clearly, at that gas mileage, and the tax that Virginia charges is losing money. So at the Camry level, we're not supporting the system we're riding on. We're paying a fraction of a penny per mile, and that just doesn't sustain. And probably Kathy's organization has research that can clearly back up, you know, truck usage versus car usage and the cost to maintain that pavement and forget building and so forth. So going to electrification is just a game changer. And again, we have not created the political environment yet, I don't believe, because I've been depressed for way too long about revenue. So, it's just going to have to turn this thing upside down to get where we need to go.
Other thoughts on the electric side of things?
It definitely seems to be, I mean, as we look at it, all the new things are coming electric. I mean, we don't get specifically into that, but that's definitely, no one seems to be building anything new that's going to be gas powered. You're starting from the ground up. So they definitely, I think the two technologies aren't intertwined necessarily, but in reality they are. Yeah. So you're definitely going to see more and more of that. And then a lot of the challenges, it's interesting how many things I see where battery technology is sort of the driving factor in things, you know, from your cell phone to your laptop to your car now. And, that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, there's a lot of focus in the EV space. This is something, just as a quick aside, on how batteries are becoming cheaper, but because gas prices have fallen so much further, that EV take-up has not been as high as expected. But there's other advantages to electric vehicle technologies, like the maintenance cost element and the performance, reliability. And I believe that now there's the first autonomous public bus test in Reno with Proterra, which is really interesting to me, at least, in terms of what that might turn into when you start bringing these pieces together, the ride share and the EV and the autonomous pieces together. They're all conjoined in lots of ways, and what creates opportunities, but also, I think, a lot of uncertainty. Yeah. You've been very patient. Thank you.
Stephen Keat, Mount Vernon District Representative to the Fairfax County Economic Advisory Commission. My question was largely anticipated by the gentleman, where you responded on, long run, in what you said then, guesses as to, what's going to happen. But in the Mount Vernon district area, where we have the Embark, there's studies going on, there's thoughts of bus lanes widening, thoughts of bringing the metro down, and so on. Now, if you take that last mile that you were talking about, that would encourage bringing metro in. This is something very positive for it. But if you go and you look at being able to lie in your vehicle, take a shower while going to work, or going to the Kennedy Center, whatever it is, that would argue that this is going to really hurt metro. Can any of the four of you make some guesses as to how this is likely to impact the metro system over the next 10, 20, 30 years? Because we will have to be making decisions in the near future on long-term investments. And just saying that, well, we don't know, while that may be an honest answer, it's not super helpful.
So I think you're likely to see, instead of like a big metro extension, a dedicated road with autonomous shuttles that run, somebody said, I think it was you who said every quarter mile, and that type of thing. I think, I'm not an expert on how much it costs to build, but I'm pretty sure the numbers are a lot cheaper in that scenario than building a whole new metro. I mean, just watching it come together along the toll road, you can see where all that expense is. So I think you'll see a lot of things like that. And then you get a lot more flexibility, right? So it wouldn't, if you think about the metro, the new extension goes from Reston to Dulles and then out to Ashburn. You could easily do with the autonomous fleet of vehicles every quarter mile, but every other one, one goes left, one goes right after it gets to a certain point. So I think you'll see more flexibility. I think initially you can see it on dedicated roads. That'll get rid of a lot of the competing with drivers. And then as technology improves, it'll, can take advantage of existing roads as well.
Part of it's going to depend on what your capacity needs are. I mean, how many people you're trying to move from one point to another. If you've got very high density, then at both ends of that equation, then your high density transit still makes sense. But if you've got a lot of variability, if you're less dense on one end or the other, then this more flexible solution makes a whole lot more sense, because you're able to serve the people in a way that they want to receive their transportation service.
We have, next question's over here on the right. Yep.
Hi, I have a question that kind of builds off of something that I think one of you mentioned earlier about the impact of how the metro was designed. You said how the metro, when it initially started out, it was kind of built just to bring people from the suburbs to the cities, and kind of since then a lot has changed. You know, the designs of houses have changed. You know, if you look at any office building or residential building these days, you know, one of the most important features involves where the car is going to be parked, how are the cars going to get in and out, ingress and egress, and all of that things. When you start getting into when you think about the impact of self-driving cars, I mean, it's hard enough to predict how it's going to affect the roads and the traffic flow. But just hypothetically, if you have a residence where people don't own a car, they don't want to incur that cost, and you know, how could this affect designs for like residential and commercial developments? I mean, if you take driveways and parking with self-driving cars, it just changes the equation completely. Can you talk a little about that? Has any kind of thought or planning gone into that kind of impact?
That's a great question. I have thoughts on this as a DC resident in a multifamily housing building, but you guys go ahead.
So one thing, business opportunity is to look into, you know, garage to man cave conversion. If you don't need to park vehicles in there, although my experience is a lot of cases you don't actually use the garage for your vehicles, but certainly not for two of them. So I think it is going to impact. You know, it's a lot of space that's used just in suburban garages, let alone then you start looking at, you know, in cities, especially like cities in Fairfax County. I think I read somewhere that for every car in Tyson's Corner, there's 3 parking places. Because you want to drive to your office, you want to drive to lunch, you're going to stop at the store afterwards. You know, that's an opportunity for much more productive infrastructure, you know, than 2 empty spots sitting everywhere.
I think you're going to see different patterns of circulation. So rather than that driveway that leads you into the parking lot or the parking garage, you're going to need a pull-off area where the vehicle can get out of the moving traffic and let you in or out. Those sort of service roads are going to become really important because you're not looking to park your vehicle and walk in. You're looking to get out and let your vehicle continue on. So I think it will change the way we lay streets out, particularly in urban areas. And that's definitely something we need to begin to think about.
And
exactly.
You go to Las Vegas, there aren't kind of parking lots. They're there, but most of the structures there are designed to cars come in. Pretty much every resort has like a line of taxi cabs or limos instead of a parking lot. That tends to be, it's actually more foot traffic than the parking lots.
So this conversation is starting to happen in city DOTs a lot now. So I don't know if anyone here has been to, say, 14th and U Street in Washington, D.C. on a Friday or Saturday night. It's like the heart of craziness, and there's congestion all over the place, and everybody is a millennial catching an Uber or Lyft. And there's discussions now with it's actually the rideshare companies have started the conversation that you want to have.
Yeah.
To say, look, city of DC, and you could apply the same logic to the city of Fairfax and other cities too. Why don't you take away this little parking meter spot and convert that to be what's called TNC, or rideshare pickoff and drop-off point, so that people, so you don't have to worry about like, where are you? I can't find you. Are you turned around? Da 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 da. Instead, that's you know where you're going to get picked up, where you're going to get dropped off. But then it begs all kinds of other questions of what the foregone revenue is for the city when you do that, what the impact is on congestion. But in an autonomous world, you could see that even being even more important, to have those drop-off points that are on the street itself to minimize congestion and to provide clarity.
Yep.
You agree with that?
I agree with that, absolutely.
Although I think it's a bit ironic if we're using Las Vegas as the example of where we're trying to get to.
Yeah, Las Vegas had the advantage though of being built the way that its designers wanted it in a car age. Cities like the region where we are, by and large, wasn't, right? With a few exceptions.
You
in the
see
exurbs.
even more in Europe, right? Where the cities are
Right.
even older.
Right. Yeah.
Thank the moderator and panel for an excellent discussion on the challenges we're facing. This is a kind of nuts and boltsy question. The California DMV publishes the number of disengagements per mile by vendor. Disengagements being when a person has to take over the control from autonomous operation. Is there any plan in Virginia to publish that information, collect that information, open source it? I think it might help the community at large.
So that goes along with the earlier, yeah, I saw you look at me. It goes along with the earlier question about our legislative stance. Because we took the hands-off approach, we actually don't necessarily know what testing is going on. We don't require you to register, so we have no way of tracking that kind of information. Now, we have started that conversation about, at your facility a month or so ago, whenever we had that meeting, about what data we might like to see. And I have to say the auto manufacturers were very open to having that conversation. So right now we can't give you that information because we don't have it. We'll see what the future brings.
I guess I can follow up on that point. So we have some studies going on in this area which are federally funded. So those reports will eventually be published in the open space or sometime around 2018 as far as that type of information could be in there.
I have been informed we have two final questions. Let's hope that they're doozies. First up, where's our first question from? Oh, great, yeah, right here, please.
Thank you. I'm more knowledgeable about connected vehicles than I am automated vehicles. So I have a two-part question. With connected vehicles, there is a wealth of data. There's more data and information than you can shake a stick at. It's overwhelming. How does automated vehicles, how will it play in the quote-unquote big data environment? Because if I understand autonomous vehicles, they're not sharing data like connected vehicles are. And part two of the question is, I can clearly see how the V2V world and connected vehicles will merge with autonomous vehicle and become one. That's pretty much a no-brainer from my perspective. What about the V2I world with autonomous vehicles? I'd like your thoughts on, is that going to happen and why? And also, how does autonomous vehicles play in the big data environment?
All right.
Right. I guess I could jump on some of those points. As far as the B2B aspect of automation, so the standards right now for wireless communication is what they call a basic safety message. So that's kind of the key information that's been standardized, and that's on, I guess, the table as far as proposed rulemaking. What that provides is a subset of data, not the complete whole entire picture. It's about more important kinematic issues of where the vehicle is, what type of speeds that are engaging in, acceleration, and so forth. So that data will be available for the automated vehicle to work on. So it's not like getting everything together. It's a very specific subset to know what to do with. But I guess there's different applications you could take from automated and connected vehicle sense. That's the aspect or focus from a safety perspective. But there is a lot of data that could be sent out as far as environment's concerned. Jumping into the V2I aspect, kind of the big data part of it too, is every vehicle out there, with all its camera systems and such, acts as a little probe, kind of driving around a road, providing a whole bunch of data information. So there could even be a case with VDOT, they may not need a particular radar sensor on one part of the road, they can just rely on the vehicles that are transmitting that information up, dedicating the capacity and vehicles traversing it.
So I would just clarify that right now, the vehicles that you rode in today, if you took a ride, they're not sharing anything. They are completely independent, and so that's that's why I always, when we have this conversation, make the push for connected automation. One, because I think you still need that situational awareness. And you're right, V2V gives you a lot of that. But there are still things that the infrastructure owner-operator could share with the vehicles that I think could be very helpful and in fact valuable. The signal timing information is probably the most basic example. When we begin to share that sort of everywhere, then I think that's very useful to an autonomous vehicle. And as you very well pointed out, we need that information coming back from those vehicles from a management standpoint. And so that V to I link is really important to us. We still want the I to V because we think there's a lot of value in it, but we also want to maintain that V to I link. Is it going to happen? So I can't answer that for sure. Certainly if the rulemaking goes through, then the V2V piece is there because every vehicle is required to have that capability of transmitting its location, speed, and heading. And then it's a matter of whether or not the infrastructure invests in listening in terms of V to I. Sending it back into the vehicle, that depends on individual vehicle manufacturers and whether or not they see a benefit in that. We're talking to a number of them, and they certainly indicate that they see benefit, but universally, I can't answer that.
Yeah, one thing I would say, though, in the autonomous vehicle world, there's tremendous amounts of data being gathered. I mean, even, there's just a lot more potential data that an autonomous vehicle is gathering than just a connected vehicle, and people are gathering that in and using it to improve their algorithms. They may not be sharing it with everybody, right? But they are definitely taking advantage of it. And part of the reason they've been able to make a lot of headway is if one vehicle learns something, their whole fleet can then learn that right after. So that's going to happen. The other thing I think from the V to I perspective is going to be even more important in an autonomous because today we're the V to I. Right? So you as the driver, you look at the stoplight and tell the car what to do. You look at the sign and tell the car what to do. You tell the car where to go. So we as the drivers are that communications gap, and if we go away as drivers, we'll still be passengers, except with the toothpaste. And we've got to replace that. So I think it'll be even more important in the future. And then the more you can do that, the more you can get some of these other benefits of, hey, the light's going to change, all right, everybody knows all the vehicles instead of going today, one and then the other and then the other, and the second car is always faster than the first, right? So now we can all go together, and it'll be even more important.
All right, interest of time, we have one final question. I believe it's right over here. Perfect. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks. This was a very informative panel discussion. Just talking kind of generally, just wanted to get thoughts from the panel as to what do you think the role of state and local government should be in terms of, or where the more of the emphasis should be in terms of implementing and testing and deployment. So, so talking generally, not specifically what Virginia is doing, but looking at examples across the country. For instance, Contra Costa County is looking at testing driverless shuttles right now to implement. So I guess the question is, should there be more emphasis on, in a sense, letting the private sector come up with the technology and then seeing how that evolves, or taking an approach in which, so that is kind of let the private sector push the technology up versus the public sector, state and local, in a sense, pull it and take on more kind of more of an implementation role, whether in the form that you believe would be in the most kind of public interest. So kind of shaping the way it, the CV, AV, materializes in the future. So for instance, using the technology for transit, and designing, implementing, and deploying projects, which kind of emphasize that particular usage of technology versus a more kind of, in a sense, disaggregated, coming up of, let's see how this technology is going to take shape in terms of individual users and autonomous vehicles that are owned individually.
That's a great question. And I think we sort of, as public agencies, sort of started out behind because the car companies definitely got out ahead of us, particularly in the connected vehicle, well, both connected and automated. But I was at a recent meeting that was owner-operators, state DOTs primarily, a couple of county folks, and from across the country, and car manufacturers. And we were talking about V2I applications because the car manufacturers are designing these applications for their vehicles. And we were talking about this concept. If you've driven on I-66, you're aware of our ATM system where it recommends a speed for you. Does anybody know why we do that? We do that so that you don't slam into the back of a queue. We're hoping we can slow you down so that everybody moves through rather than having someone slam on the brakes when they get to the end of the queue, because then, of course, that just intensifies the problem. And when we told them the application that we had in mind, they said, oh, we do that. That's called queue warning. I said, queue warning is not what I'm looking for. When they get to the end of the queue, it's too late. I need to get to them upstream so that they slow down and flow through more smoothly. And so I think those kinds of conversations are really, really important. And when you get to the higher level where you're talking about, are we implementing in a personally owned automated vehicle, or are we talking about some sort of shared use mobility or transit application, the way you think about it is very, very different. And so if you're only focused on the technology and I need to make this vehicle operate on its own, you lose sight of that bigger context. And so I think the conversations that are finally starting to happen between the technology developers and the implementers or the end users are really helping to shape and to create something useful out of all of it. I mean, the technology clearly is useful, but in order to get this larger societal benefit, we need to keep that larger context. Great question.
Final thoughts?
No, we're seeing the same thing, though. You really have the technology company. I mean, the technology companies are going to be the ones to come up with the basic technology or university research and that sort of thing. But in order to apply it, on public roads, you've got to work with the government. And we see a lot of back and forth and a lot of unknowns. I mean, one of the big challenges in the connected vehicle space is everyone wants to do anything, but all of this stuff usually has a acronym of V or V for vehicle to vehicle or vehicle to infrastructure. The big challenge right now is there's not a lot of V's. Yeah. There's not, there might be 100,000 cars at the end of this year. There might be 10,000 maybe today. That might be a little optimistic.
We're going to end it there. Please join me in thanking the panel for a robust conversation. As we draw to a close, I think John used the word uncertainty, and I think that really is sort of like a summing point. And I think that's what makes this space, at least to me, really fascinating and exciting. Like we invest in startups. There's spaces where you could play in this. I think it's an exciting space for universities to play a role and for government officials as well, because there really is. Was 100,000 vehicles that are on the V side right now, roughly? I think that's right.
Well, by the end of the year.
Yeah, by the end of the year.
By the end of the year.
Right. And when we're going to see widespread deployment, we don't know. Who's going to be using it first? It's really hard to say. And in what form, shuttles versus individual cars, that's not totally known either. There were a bunch of questions people asked, good questions, about regulation in terms of what the appropriate role is for a county or for a state to regulate. Virginia's taken a very particular approach at the state level, which is very different from other states, and that's a really important conversation to have as well. There's a lot that's still in the beginning stages of being figured out around this technology, but I think One thing that you can see is that here in Fairfax, there really are not many places in the country where you have this integration of government along with a university really working on the research in this closely. I think of Michigan, arguably Pennsylvania and the Pittsburgh area, but there's not many. It's something special, and it's potentially, I think, something that many of you will want to follow and potentially be involved with. So I want to thank the county for convening this panel. It's been a pleasure for me to moderate it. And with that, I'd like to introduce for closing remarks Robert Stalzer, who is the Deputy County Executive. Please.
I want to thank everyone for being here. I really want to thank our panelists and our moderator for doing a great job. I want to thank our partners and our sponsors, including RK&K, Virginia Tech, Virginia Department of Transportation, and E-Trans Systems. I want to especially thank the Board of Supervisors for being steadfast supporters of economic success in Fairfax County. Without their unwavering focus on our present and our future, events like this would not happen. I'd also like to thank the vast team of Fairfax County staff who worked together tirelessly over the last several months to pull this together. In particular, Etta Davis and Dale Castello were the coordinators, but we literally had dozens of Fairfax County staff across many, many different operations and departments working together to make this event happen. So thank you very much for all of your efforts. The conversation today, as you heard, is the first in a series of community dialogues on technology and innovation. And we hope that all of you will join us personally, and we also hope that you'll share what you learned and what you heard and what you felt today with your colleagues and your partners in the community. We really think that this is a way to do many positive things in Fairfax County and the region, some of which we haven't done before because we haven't necessarily convened these types of conversations, and we think this is very, very important. We're going to continue the discussion on connected and driverless technology, including the ecosystem for connected and automated vehicles. And we plan to delve into a number of other topics, including big data for the future of mobility, smart cities, and connected vehicle infrastructure, electrification of the roads. I learned a lot about automated vehicles today. I learned a lot about connected vehicles. I had very limited experience and exposure to both those topics. In fact, my latest experience of being connected to a vehicle was when my son, who was late for his final at George Mason yesterday, called me just as the Fairfax County police car was pulling off after having written him a $140 ticket on Westock. So I clearly have a lot to learn in terms of both automation and probably parental discipline too. But if you did not give us your name and contact information this morning so that we can reach out to you, please email us at success@fairfaxcounty.gov. If one of those options doesn't work, just grab one of the staff folks with the blue name tag, and we would like to get you on our roster for future notification. Throughout the discussion today, we made it very clear that we're trying to foster innovation. And as was mentioned repeatedly, Fairfax County is actively working to spur and stimulate innovation, working with our partners like Virginia Tech, George Mason University, and many, many others. When it comes to connected and driverless technology, we have an opportunity to become an innovation hub. We have local companies like E-Trans and others based here in Fairfax, not to mention the cutting-edge research being road tested here literally today by the Commonwealth of Virginia and Virginia Tech. And while we don't know what the future holds exactly when it comes to this technology, we want to be in the driver's seat when it comes to understanding the latest version and planning for the future. It's not a question of if, but when this technology will be widely found here on our roads. Last point, and perhaps the most important, staff advises me that we still have a ton of food left. So I want you to not stuff your pockets, but certainly avail yourself. My understanding is that the test vehicles will still be here till 5 o'clock. So for those of you that either got a ride and want another one, or you didn't get a chance, please take an opportunity to either touch or get in the vehicles and go for a test drive. Again, thanks for being here. Look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.